Hey students, so today we are going to continue with our chapter forearm with the continuation of the topic arteries of front of forearm. Features. The most conspicuous arteries of the forearm are the radial and ulnar arteries. However, they mainly supply the hand through the deep and superficial palmar arches. The arterial supply of the forearm is chiefly derived from the common interosseous branch of the ulnar artery, which divides into anterior and posterior interosseous arteries. The posterior interosseous artery is reinforced in the upper part and replaced in the lower part by the anterior interosseous artery. Radial artery, beginning, course, and termination. Radial artery, figure 9.9, is the smaller terminal branch of the brachial artery in the cubital fossa. It runs downwards to the wrist with a lateral convexity. It leaves the forearm by turning posteriorly and entering the anatomical snuff box. As compared to the ulnar artery, it is quite superficial throughout its whole course. Its distribution in the hand is described later. Relations. Number 1. Anteriorly. It is overlapped by the brachioradialis in its upper part, but in the lower half it is covered only by skin, superficial and deep fasciae. Number 2. Posteriorly. It is related to the muscles attached to anterior surface of radius, that is, biceps brachii, flexor pollicis longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, and pronator quadratus. Number 3. Medially. It is related to the pronator teres in the upper one-third and the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis in the lower two-thirds of its course, figures 9.9 and 9.10. Number 4. Laterally. Brachioradialis in the whole extent and the radial nerve in the middle one-third. Number 5. The artery is accompanied by venae comitants, branches in the forearm. Number 1. The radial recurrent artery arises just below the elbow, runs upwards deep to the brachioradialis, and ends by anastomosing with the radial collateral artery, anterior branch of profunda brachii artery, in front of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. See figure 8.10. Number 2. Muscular branches are given to the lateral muscles of the forearm. Number 3. The palmocarpal branch arises near the lower border of the pronator quadratus, runs medially deep to the flexor tendons, and ends by anastomosing with the palmocarpal branch of the ulnar artery in front of the middle of the recurrent branch of the deep palmar arch to form a cruciform anastomosis. The palmocarpal arch supplies bones and wrists at the wrist. Number 4. The dorsal carpal branch. It forms dorsal carpal arch with branch of ulnar artery. Number 5. The superficial palmar branch arises just before the radial artery leaves the forearm by winding backwards. The branch passes through the thinner muscles and ends by joining the terminal part of the ulnar artery to complete the superficial palmar arch. Figure 9.20. Ulnar artery. Beginning, course, and termination. Ulnar artery is the larger terminal branch of the brachial artery and begins in the cubital fossa. Figure 9.10. The artery runs obliquely downwards and medially in the upper one-third of the forearm, but in the lower two-thirds of the forearm, its course is vertical. Figure 9.4. It enters the palm by passing superficial to the flexor retinaculum. Its distribution in the hand is described later. Relations. Number 1. Anteriorly. In its upper half, the artery is deep, and is covered by muscles arising from common flexor origin and median nerve. The lower half of the artery is superficial and is covered only by skin and fascia. Figure 9.4. Number 2. Posteriorly. It lies on brachialis and on the flexor digitorum profundus. Number 3. Medially. It is related to the ulnar nerve and to the flexor carpi ulnaris, figure 9.11. Number 4. Laterally. It is related to the flexor digitorum superficialis, figure 9.4, and median nerve. Number 5. The artery is accompanied by venae comitans. Branches. Number 1. The anterior and posterior ulnar recurrent arteries anastomose around the elbow. The smaller anterior ulnar recurrent artery ends by anastomosing with the inferior ulnar collateral artery in front of the medial epicondyle. The larger posterior ulnar recurrent artery arises lower than the anterior and ends by anastomosing with the superior ulnar collateral artery behind the medial epicondyle. See figure 8.10. Number 2. The common interosseous artery, about 1 centimeter long, arises just below the radial tuberosity. It passes backwards to reach the upper border of the interosseous membrane and end by dividing into the anterior and posterior interosseous arteries. The anterior interosseous artery is the deepest artery on the front of the forearm. It accompanies the anterior interosseous nerve. It descends on the surface of the interosseous membrane between the flexor digitorum profundus and the flexor pollicis longus, figure 9.5a. It pierces the interosseous membrane at the upper border of the pronator quadratus to enter the extensor compartment. The artery gives muscular branches to the deep muscles of the front of the forearm, nutrient branches to the radius and ulna, and a median artery which accompanies the median nerve. Near its origin, the posterior interosseous artery gives off the interosseous recurrent artery which runs upwards and ends by anastomosing with the middle collateral artery, posterior branch of profunda brachii artery behind the lateral epicondyle. The posterior interosseous artery passes through a gap above the interosseous membrane to the back of forearm. Figure 8.10. Number 3. Muscular branches supply the medial muscles of the forearm. Number 4 and 5. Palmar and dorsal carpal branches take part in the anastomosis around the wrist joint. The palmar carpal branch helps to form the palmar carpal arch. The dorsal carpal branch arises just above the pisiform bone, winds backwards deep to the tendons, and ends in the dorsal carpal arch. This arch is formed medially by the dorsal carpal branch of the ulnar artery and laterally by the dorsal carpal branch of the radial artery. Dissection. Having dissected the superficial and deep group of muscles of the forearm, identify the terminal branches of the brachial artery. For example, ulnar and radial arteries and their branches. Radial artery follows the direction of the brachial artery, figure 9.9. Ulnar artery passes obliquely deep to heads of pronator teres and then runs vertically till the wrist. Carefully look for common interosseous branch of ulnar artery and its anterior and posterior branches. Now, nerves of front of forearm. Nerves of the front of the forearm are the median, ulnar, and radial nerves. The radial and ulnar nerves run along the margins of the forearm and are never crossed by the corresponding vessels which gradually approach them. The ulnar artery, while approaching the ulnar nerve, gets crossed by the median nerve, figure 9.10. Median nerve. Median nerve is the main nerve of the front of the forearm. It also supplies the muscles of thenar eminence, figure 9.10. The median nerve controls coarse movements of the hand as it supplies most of the long muscles of the front of the forearm. It is therefore called the laborer's nerve. Course. Median nerve lies medial to brachial artery and enters the cubital fossa. It is the most medial content of cubital fossa, figure 9.11. Then it enters the forearm to lie between flexor digitorum superficialis and flexor digitorum profundus. It lies adherent to the back of superficial muscle, figure 9.5. Then it reaches down the region of wrist where it lies deep and lateral to the palmaris longus tendon, figure 9.10. Lastly, it passes deep to flexor retinaculum through carpal tunnel to enter the palm, figure 9.12. Relations. Number 1. In the cubital fossa, median nerve lies medial to the brachial artery, behind the bicipital aponeurosis and in front of the brachialis. See figure 8.17. Number 2. The median nerve enters the forearm by passing between the two heads of the pronator teres. Here, it crosses the ulnar artery from which it is separated by the deep head of the pronator teres, figure 9.11. Number 3. Along with the ulnar artery, the median nerve passes beneath the fibrous arch of the flexor digitorum superficialis and runs deep to this muscle on the surface of the flexor digitorum profundus. It is accompanied by the median artery, a branch of the anterior introitious artery, about 5 cm above the flexor retinaculum wrist. It becomes superficial and lies between the tendons of the flexor carpi radialis laterally and the flexor digitorum superficialis medially. It is overlapped by the tendon of the palmaris longus. The median nerve enters the palm by passing deep to the flexor retinaculum through the carpal tunnel. Branches. Number 1. Muscular branches are given off in the cubital fossa to flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, and flexor digitorum superficialis, figure 9.12. Number 2. The anterior introitious branch is given off in the upper part of the forearm. It supplies the flexor pollicis longus, the lateral half of the flexor digitorum profundus, giving rise to tendons for the index and middle fingers, and the pronator quadratus. The nerve also supplies the distal radio-ulnar and wrist joints, figure 9.12. Number 3. The palmar cutaneous branch arising a short distance above the flexor retinaculum lies superficial to it and supplies the skin over the thenar eminence and the central part of the palm. See figure 7.1a. Number 4. Articular branches are given to the elbow joint and to the proximal radio-ulnar joint. Number 5. Vascular branches supply the radial and ulnar arteries. Number 6. A communicating branch is given to the ulnar nerve. Thank you.